You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Joining us is Mudar Zahran. He's a Jordanian Palestinian writer and a political activist who's been exiled to the United Kingdom since 2010, and he travels extensively discussing the important issues that we'll be discussing, and he's joining us right now. Mudar, you're in the West Bank right now?
Yes, so I'm in Israel right now as we speak, and also I'm in the outskirts of the West Bank. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and we do so much appreciate your joining us to give us a sense of what is going on there in the streets in Israel. We understand that the events that are going on in that area concern not only the people of Israel, but the people in the surrounding areas, the people who are in Gaza, the people in the West Bank. It does impact Jordan. It does impact Egypt. It does impact Syria and Lebanon as well, because as this particular conflict, if it does spiral out of control, it will certainly impact those neighbors. But could you give us a sense, based on the talks right now, of a potential ceasefire, where that stands?
Well, there is enough talk about the potential ceasefire. Egypt, under the administration of President Sisi, is doing a wonderful job trying to save blood from both sides. But unfortunately, the terrorist, reckless, inhumane group called Hamas, which is supposed to come from my people, the Palestinians, has refused four ceasefires as we speak. Hamas, which many people watch in Fox News, CNN, and others, may not realize that Hamas has denied its own people 4 ceasefires. Hamas is not interested in the ceasefire because right now all of Hamas leaders are away out of Gaza, living the life of luxury in Qatar and elsewhere and in Jordan, and therefore they don't care if all Gazans die, and they would keep terrorizing Israeli civilians while we speak. I doubt there's ever going to be a ceasefire coming out of this. If it happens, it would be a miracle, but it still might happen. But in short, Hamas is not interested in a ceasefire. It would only do a ceasefire if it gets a huge compromise or a compensation, if I may say, from Israel. So I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. Now, a question for you. Now, Hamas, from our understanding, is an offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood has their own problems in Egypt with the Sisi government. Do you feel that the potential of the Muslim Brotherhood regaining a foothold and pushing Hamas to continue, is that a possibility, or is that what's actually happening?
I have been interviewed about this like close to 15 times in the last 2 weeks, and this is the smartest question I've received about the subject. All that's happening, this is not Hamas's war, this is not Israel's war. What we have is Jordan, Qatar, Iran, and Syria, who are supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. Few people might believe this, that Jordan's king supports the Muslim Brotherhood. Those people were very unhappy to see Sisi becoming president of Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood failing. So they're trying to make a point by terrorizing Israel, and this is not the first time Israel finds itself as a scapegoat for someone else. So they're terrorizing Israel, and they were provoking Israel to get the attack. Israel ignored their rockets for 3 consecutive weeks until it attacked. And eventually, what they want to do is to make both Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates look bad. They want to have the final say. They want to say, we can terrorize Jews in Israel, and Egypt can do nothing. And that's why I don't think there's going to be a ceasefire. Also, unfortunately, we have to call things by their own name. They have strong support, the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, which is under the Muslim Brotherhood. Unfortunately, they have strong support in the White House. I have nothing against President Obama. I am a Democrat. I was rallying for the Democrats in New Hampshire for like 15 years of my life. But the bottom line is there's a huge misconception. America and the American establishment does not seem to accept that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. Why is Hamas pushing all this trouble? Because they have the support of Qatar and Jordan's king, who are close friends of President Obama, and he's fallen under the influence. Jordan and Qatar should be punished for what they're doing with Hamas at the moment. Instead, Qatar gets an arms deal for $11 billion, which might end up in Hamas's hand either way. So America has lost its way, and we are all paying for bad American policies, and the Israelis and the Gazan civilians are paying because of the recklessness in Washington.
Mudar, I'd like you to expand on that thought just slightly, because it concerned me greatly this weekend in particular, reading about John Kerry, what I would use the word emboldening both Turkey and Qatar at a time when he probably should have been publicly slapping them down for being both the financiers or central bankers, as well as perhaps the biggest global instigators of what's going on in Gaza right now. And then he's turning to the very people who want to see murder and mayhem and trying to empower them as the guys who should somehow be settling the situation. Is there anything I'm missing here?
Well, this started long time back. This started when, unfortunately, President Obama was appeasing oil and gas importance and appeasing the King of Jordan because of his lobbying and connections in D.C., and both men, the Emir of Qatar and the King of Jordan, are working very hard to promote the Muslim Brotherhood in the White House. Right now, it's become like a strategy for the White House and U.S. Department of State to consider the Muslim Brotherhood the moderate strategic partner, which is basically insanity. The Charter of the Muslim Brotherhood wants an Islamic Sharia in the White House itself. And I remember on YouTube, you can see the speeches of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders saying that we're going to put the Islamist flag on the White House. So it's basically sleeping with the enemy and, warming a snake next to the fire, thinking it's not going to bite you back. We need to realize Mr. Osama bin Laden was a former Muslim Brotherhood member. Basically, Muslim Brotherhood instigated 9/11 directly or indirectly. So this is a huge sin which America will pay for years to come. If this president is to be a strong president, he has to go tell Qatar to shut up and behave, or simply, get a punishment, at least being labeled as a terrorist financing a country and cutting them off from international banks and even freezing the Qatari $3 trillion worth of assets in the West. And the King of Jordan, he lives under American and Israeli protection and money. And they should basically, both Israel and the United States, tell him to behave or get a huge punishment back. But why Israel wouldn't do that? Because we have, again, a Muslim Brotherhood, King of Jordan, Emir of Qatar, appeasing president in the White House. Mr. Obama, you are committing a huge mistake, and you are basically, knowingly or worse, unknowingly, jeopardizing American interests.
Now, Mudar, touching on Jordan briefly, isn't perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of this entire equation the fact that for Israel to in any way upset the balance of the Jordanian border between Israel and Jordan, when there's so much chaos on the northern and the southern borders, the fact that Jordan is, quote-unquote, a quiet border seems basically to give Jordan the right of way to do whatever they want with their own population. Isn't it a huge risk for Israel to shake that border up?
It definitely is, but the formula has changed big time. In one sense, and I understand some of your listeners possibly are good Americans with Jewish heritage or Jewish faith. They need to understand that Jordan's borders are secure not because of the king and not because of the royal family of 87 individuals. Jordan's king, and I can speak authoritatively about this because I've worked for the U.S. Department of State for years in Jordan. Jordan's borders are quiet because of 12,500 American soldiers in Jordan, the second largest state in the Middle East, and 100,000 Jordanian army members, personnel, who are stationed basically at the borders, and the Jordanian army is not under the King of Jordan's control at all. This is like common knowledge in Washington, they are under the control of what's called the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the military CIA. Very few Americans know it exists. Those people, and I'm speaking authoritatively, not a theory, basically the king has no control over the army, and what keeps the country together is the army. The same way Egypt went astray with the Muslim Brotherhood, the army came and corrected the situation. That's the same thing that's going to go in Jordan. Basically, it's the guy in the the Jordanian palace or the Jordanian White House is going to become different. And while this is a lengthy argument, you need to understand and remember that it's Israel now who's Israel and the United States protecting Jordan from ISIS. So if the king is being protected from ISIS by Israel, and if the king is being financed, supported with the public, being saved from the Arab Spring by Israel, it means that, honestly, there's no need for the king anymore. And for half the effort, they could place someone who basically could be a Palestinian, and for the first time we're going to have a Palestinian state. And even the new Palestinian guy in the palace, even if he hates Israel and wants to fight Israel, he has no say over the army. President Morsi of Egypt has zero say over the army. In my opinion, if the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt had any say over the army, they would have attacked Israel the next day. So Jordan is safe if anything, and to be honest, I've spoken to some thinkers and military strategists in the academia of Israel. One of them is, for example, Professor Mordechai Kedar, and I've sensed, I cannot speak on his behalf, I don't think they seem to be very concerned about Jordan at the moment, because they know who calls the shots in that country. But on the other hand, my question is, Mr. King of Jordan, why are you doing this to us Palestinians? Why are you doing this to the region? Why are you doing this to Israel, the only country that protected your family for 90 years, saved you through the 1970 Civil War, and keeps you in power even today? Why are you slapping them back in the face? I mean, it's insanity. The answer is Qatar's money. Qatar pays billions and billions for those who support it. For example, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, who used to be a friend of the Israelis, is now turning against them because of Qatar's money. And I can only pray to God that Qatar's money has not found its way to Washington, D.C.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm sort of thinking that it has. Mudar, when I look at and evaluate what you just said, is there a concern on the behalf of the Jordanian army right now, or do they fear what would happen in the street if the Palestinians were to, well, one of two things, if within Jordan the Palestinians were to rise up, but are they also fearful of what would happen if the people in Gaza or the West Bank would come into Jordan? What would happen?
Well, okay. First of all, we need to remember that the British mandate for Palestine, the country formerly known as Palestine, which included Jews and Arabs together, is stretched from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the borders in Iraq, and there was nothing called Jordan. And according to international law, the Jews were promised as an oppressed minority in an island of Arab Muslims, were promised a piece of land, which is that land. And then they gave up 78% of it, hoping that Jordan's going to become a Palestinian state, and he actually wanted to call it Palestine. Then the new kings called it a manufactured name called Jordan, which never existed in history. And so basically those Gazans and those West Bankers, Jordan is their country. If they move back, it's like someone preventing you from moving to New Jersey because they tell you, oh, we know you're American, but this is not your country, which would be, impossible and illogical. So actually, if the King of Jordan had the slightest humanity, slightest respect, those Gazans should be now going as at least temporarily to their country, Jordan, until things settle up, until maybe Israel finishes off Hamas. Right now, Israel cannot finish Hamas because the only way to do it is kill 500,000 Gazans in the middle. He's being an obstacle. In other words, every way you think about it, the King of Jordan is an obstacle. And now the Jordanian army is not worried about the Palestinians because we have managed, I can authoritatively claim and speak, that we as leaders of the Jordanian opposition, secular opposition, we have managed to cool them down against any anti-Israeli protests. And the ones that happened were very minor, like barely a few thousand. And most of them, my sources confirmed, were encouraged to go by the Jordanian intelligence service and Jordanian media. So I don't think there's any real concern in Jordan at the moment. I think it's actually, in my opinion, I think it's time to actually right the wrong and give the Palestinians their state in that country.
Yeah, well, clearly it's time for looking at a solution along that lines, and I think it's very interesting, a lot of what you just said. We haven't asked you this, so I think this is important to bring up, being that in so many of the other countries in the region, there has been a lot of fighting between the different variations or forms of Islam, the Shia, the Kurds, Sunni, and other offsprings. But what Jordan, I believe, is an overwhelming majority Sunni, correct?
Actually, almost 100%.
Okay, and then there's a small percentage that I believe is still Christian.
Yeah, around 4%, around 180,000 Christians.
So, and in Gaza, is it the same similar makeup in Gaza and also in the West Bank?
In Gaza, we have only 1,500 Christians. They all fled after Hamas took over. We used to have around 200,000 Christians over the years. Now they're 1,500, which is another sad situation for Christians, as we see in the rest of the Middle East. Actually, a Christian Holocaust, I call it. In Jordan, in the West Bank, the makeup is around very similar to Jordan. In the range, they're higher. They were in the range of 12 to 8. So, many estimates between 8 and 12%. There's no genuine problem in Jordan because the two major rival sects of Islam, Sunni and Shiites, that problem we don't have in Jordan because the people in Jordan are mostly Sunnis. But again, we have eyes at the borders, and unless Israel and the United States save us, we will be in deep trouble very soon. But it seems that they're taking this seriously.
Yeah, that's very good point because I noticed that ISIS, as they're making even more significant gains as we speak every day, can be and soon a threat to not only Jordan but going back into Syria and could unravel Lebanon again, even Egypt, I suppose, and this whole region could really become engulfed in what's going on with that as well.
Well, and soon maybe the United States, because you have many American Muslims and American Arab, and I am a Muslim, I'm an Arab who used to live in the United States. You have many hundreds of American Muslims and thousands of European Muslims who are now fighting with ISIS. And those are eventually going to get home, and they're not going to be denied an entry, and they're going to possibly exercise some of what they trained in Syria and Iraq. So this mess we are in is much bigger than you can actually imagine, and it troubles me sincerely when I hear some Americans saying, "What do we have to do with Gaza? Why do we care for the Palestinians? Who cares for the Israelis? Why do we keep solving Israel's trouble?" And which is actually, no, the trouble is here, where I stand right here in the middle between exactly the West Bank and Israel, and it's going to eventually filter down to the United States. So let's pray for the best, but it is a very tricky situation, to be honest with you.
Mudar, it's a very interesting point you bring up, because I've often been of the mindset that part of the reason why we're seeing what we are in the worldwide press is just deep-seated anti-Semitism, looking for an opportunity to enjoy the sunlight, so to speak. But another part of it is the fact that people around the world aren't afraid of Israel. America and the UK and Spain and Italy, none of them are afraid of Israel attacking them or Israel creating violence in their street. And it seems like because we're so quick, and I say we as a global community, the West is so quick to try to appease the radicals that it feels to me like we continue to breed more radicals. And there's a hidden question in there, which is, you just spend a lot of time now with your people all over the West Bank. Are people there starting to understand that the radical equation is only going to beget more violence and not actually solve problems, or are they seeing the West's appeasement of violence as maybe sowing the seeds for an increase in violence?
I have to be honest, and you asked a question that has several answers, so I'll make it short if I could. In the broader Middle East, the message America is sending is we are weak, we fear the Islamists, and the Islamists are tough guys, and actually I've seen many more Muslims converting into the ISIS religion, if I may say, because you guys look like you are weak. You can't do anything. You can't do anything. Syria, Assad was bragging the other day on television that America could not remove him, and actually Obama will finish his term and leave while he's still in power. So you looked weak in Syria, and honestly, for example, in Syria, it started as the secular revolution, and now they turned into Islamism because the United States gave up on and didn't do anything. If it was George W. Bush, I think he would have acted a long time ago. But again, President Obama, I hope any of your staff is listening here, you're doing a very bad job in America's image. Now, in the West Bank, the Palestinians in Jordan I'm proud to be a Palestinian, but the Palestinians in Jordan are a different breed. They're more secular. They're least anti-Islamist. 49% of them are supportive of the United States in a recent study. The Palestinians in the West Bank are more Islamified. They lean towards Islamism strongly, and they seem to support Hamas with passion. I have to say the truth. Now, the Palestinians in Gaza, I've been speaking to them, have made over 70, 60, something like that, phone calls to Gaza in the last 2 weeks, and every single one of them was against Hamas. And a recent study by the wonderful Washington Institute showed that most Gazans were against the Hamas. And therefore, everyone is different. But when you speak about the Muslim world, radicalism is on the rise, and the radicals seem to be winning ground, which is more trouble for you. Now, if I may make a comment, please?
Please.
Okay, the major problem in America, me talking to you as an Orthodox practicing Muslim who's proud of his religion and understands it as a religion of peace, America is too afraid to call things by their own name. Now, you use terms like radical Islam, use terms like the Islamists, the radicals. We have to understand the nature of Islam as a religion which I belong to. Islam in the Quran is very similar to the Torah, the Old Testament, and there are arguments that either Muhammad was a prophet who got the same message as the Torah, or someone who just copied the Torah. But either way, it's very similar to the Torah. Quran is not bad, actually. It has incredibly wonderful values, even of tolerance and no enforcement of religion, blah, 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 good things. The problem we have is with the Hadith. Hadith is allegedly teachings of Muhammad, which were written 500 years after Muhammad died, and there's not any form of evidence that whoever written that had any connections to Muhammad, and the Hadith contradicts what's in the Quran. For example, having to force others to accept your religion. So all you see about the dhimmitude, the dhimma, paying jizya, and treating the Christians and Jews as second-class citizens, all of this basically and openly comes from the Hadith. Well, very few non-Muslims understand that. Now, most Muslims believe in the Hadith. They think Hadith is from God. And therefore, if you are an educated Muslim who studies Islam and Hadith, you basically become radicalized automatically. If you don't study, most Muslims have never read the Hadith well, so they listen to what the Imams say, and that's why they're not radicalized. Now, the genuine Muslims, which are very, very few, they read the Quran and they see the similarities and tolerance presented. Despite a few things, it's at 90% wonderful, and I'm proud of it. But this is the point. If you follow the Hadith, which most Muslims believe in, you automatically become radicalized, because there are values in the hadith which I don't believe that my prophet ever said such things. He can't say things that contradict the Quran, which are in the hadith. If you are a normal Muslim who just follows the hadith, you become a radical. America is too afraid, the West is too afraid to call things by their wrong name. They're too afraid to say openly, you Islamic imams, big Muslim countries, you have to reform your religion. You have to do just what Christianity did. So there's this political correctness that's preventing you from acting. Very few, even in the West, are still reluctant to call Hamas a terrorist organization. They go like they have a disagreement with Israel, which they act badly. No, they are a terrorist radical organization that's like Boko Haram, like ISIS, and they deserve to be treated as such. And actually, I'm not sure why Israel by itself and the good Palestinians, by the way, there are Palestinians fighting Hamas, in case you didn't know. And we lost 2,000 Palestinians fighting Hamas a few years ago in 2 days. So whoever's against Hamas, there are very few people, basically Israel and a few good Palestinians, and the world is just watching. Why can't they treat Hamas like Al-Qaeda? I'm not sure as I speak.
It's interesting. Two quick things come to mind while I listen to your discussion of this, and I really appreciate it because you just added some very, very important color commentary and even educated me a bit. One is when you look at what's happening with ISIS, I believe exactly the opposite of what is happening with America's power and prestige, as you so clearly pointed out. Obama's weakness is creating a vacuum. Not only is that vacuum being filled, but I believe ISIS is not crazy. ISIS is brutal but not crazy, and I think they're being very methodical. Their brutality, you've probably seen similar pictures, literally 1,500 men lined up, marched, and then shot in the back of the heads. In a way, to me, I found it shockingly eerie watching it because it was reminiscent of me watching my ancestors go to the Nazi gas chambers without seemingly putting up much of a fight, even though mostly they knew what their final destination was. And I think the result, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's something in the human psyche that they hit a level of fear that's so extreme that even the slightest bit of hope, like the bullet might miss me and only shoot the two people on the side of me, people are just paralyzed by that fear. And my sense is that's one of the big problems throughout the Islamic world right now is that the radicals seem to be in charge in so many places, and the radicals have made it clear that if you don't agree with us, you might be dead. That gives them a huge advantage over somebody like yourself who says, listen, please listen to me, let me explain why I believe it's a peaceful religion. Well, they may or may not listen to you, but they're not afraid that if they don't listen to you, something bad will happen. And I think that's the real battle that we're fighting, and unless we call it out by name, as you're saying, kind of where we open this conversation up, that the president, or John Kerry, must be calling out Qatar, then we're continuing to yield ground to the radicals, and I don't know where that game ends, but it's not going to be pretty for anybody. Your people, my people, all civilized people.
Well, you're absolutely correct about basically everything you said now. And who would the average Muslim, we have 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, if half of them were terrorists, the world would be on fire. So it's still safe to assume that the terrorists are the major, like a minute minority within the 1.6 Muslims. Nonetheless, what would you do if you were in their place? Should they listen to American values, which are just we see only on TV through President Secretary Kerry, or should you listen to the guy pointing a gun at your head and threatening to slaughter your family and take your little girls as slaves, as female sex slaves like ISIS does? So basically, the ISIS and the terrorists, they have the final word. It's the same situation as in Gaza. Hamas, for God's sake, the leaders of Hamas are traveling in the private jets of a U.S. ally, the private jets of Qatar and Jordan. Imagine, so they have access. Basically, Khalid Mish'al, Hamas leader, he has an access to spread information and demands and points of views to America, to the White House. No other terrorist group has ever had that in history. I think, honestly, the West in general and the United States have lost its way. And while we were blaming George W. for excessive force and basically a show-off of strength, we also are blaming President Obama for his softness and apparent weakness. The Islamists now view America as a very weak country. And while listening to Hamas television here in the West Bank, I was listening to Hamas television, and one of the arguments, one of their people was saying that Israel cannot win because who's going to support them now? The United States cannot support them. The United States can't do anything anymore. It was on television. So this is very dangerous, and my kids and yours are going to pay for this. Please remember that Hitler was overlooked for a very long time when he was saying and doing what he was doing, and everyone thought it was not going to be my problem until the Nazis marched through Paris and wanted to go to London.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think you could almost sum this up, that the problem that we face in the rise of the extremism in this region is simply from the fact that they continue to get the funding and support, that Western journalists just don't clearly understand the issues that we've pointed out, and they get the support from weak governments in the West and in particular in the U.S. And I agree with you 100%. I think that when you show your weakness, your enemies will always take advantage of that. And quite frankly, I think Israel has to stand their ground here, because if they give in, then they will simply empower. They may have to go it alone for a little bit, but they will simply empower those who are trying to take them on. Now, I'd like to, if we can, just in a few more minutes that we could spend with you, and again, Mudar, we really thank you so much for taking your time and so much time that you've spent with us. But I want to address an issue that I think is difficult for anyone to tackle, and that is during it. Now, we're not justifying here why this is happening, but what is the sense on the street? How do the people feel, not just Israelis, but in the West Bank and anyone you've spoken to in Gaza, about the civilians who are being caught up in the middle of this warfare? How are they holding responsible, and just give us some idea of how they really feel about this.
The West Bankers are watching Arab and American and Western television, and therefore they're just mimicking what they see happening to their brothers and sisters, that it's the Jews are evil, the Jews drink the blood of children. And in the West Bank, I mean, they hate now Israel. I've never seen them hating Jews, even during Operation Castlet a few years ago, never to this point. And it's all because Al Jazeera, Qatar's TV, and Jordan King TV, the Jordanian state television, they're both charging them up that, you know, your children are being slaughtered in Gaza by the Jews, etc. Now, the people in Gaza I'm talking to, they are all blaming Hamas. There was, after a Shija'iyah massacre, which is a massacre I can't blame Israel for, I'm blaming Hamas for. They prevented people from moving from the area after Israel has issued warning, even in television, that they should move. We're going to bomb the area, which no other army in the world does that, by the way. And instead of moving, Hamas prevented them, and they got killed by like almost 150, 120 people. After that massacre, the Palestinians in Beit Hanun area in Gaza and another area called Shija'iyah, the same area where the massacre happened, they took to the streets to protest against Hamas. Hamas killed 5 and beheaded 1. They didn't kill him. The leader of the protest was beheaded. They cut his head. And they said on their webpage over Facebook, their page, they said we killed 6 traitors. 6 traitors, 6 Israeli collaborators. So people in Gaza, I can authoritatively claim and actually confirm that they hate Hamas with a passion and hold it responsible. Also, the wonderful and courageous Lisa Duftery of the Fox News, she went in and spoke to Gazans on the ground. And Lisa, they were told her, she came back with the same outcome, that they hold Hamas responsible. Also, to answer the Western viewer and even the Israeli viewer who's not sure what's really happening, I can confirm to them that I am a Palestinian. I don't love Israel. I don't actually care much for Israel, but I care much for the truth. I can assure you Gaza is the most densely populated region in the Middle East and some of the most densely populated in the universe. 2 million people in an area the size barely of Washington, D.C. Therefore, if Israel was actually planning on killing and butchering Palestinians, Israel could wipe off all of them in like 2 days, even less. In addition, the casualty numbers, which is horrifying, which is mesmerizing to see children torn into pieces, the casualty number is like a minimum. It's like I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the houses being bombed with surgical rockets, which destroys. It's like a miracle. They bomb a house, only the house by itself falls, and the 2 attached houses don't fall with it. And it's on YouTube. You can see it. I cannot sit here and lie about Israel. Israel is not committing a massacre, a genocide. Israel is just defending itself, and Hamas is like the most packed place in area. You hit a packed area, anywhere you hit, there's going to be civilians. In addition, let me confirm, Hamas television each time issues warning that there has been a warning from the Israeli army for people to evacuate so-and-so. We are warning you not to do so. Why are they telling my people not to leave the area the Israeli army is going to hit? I've never seen this happening in any country in the universe where a government is telling its own people not to leave a war zone. Hamas is committing crimes. It's a terrorist organization. It butchers my own people, and I want it out of the galaxy for the good of my own people, not for the Israelis.
And, well, Mudar, first of all, thank you for that very honest and open information. And I agree with you. It is horrifying to see the bodies, the pain that the people are feeling, the children who have got caught in a way. Both of us being parents, and John, being a father as well, we could not sit here and not feel the pain and imagine what if that were our own children. And it plays to the bigger problem. And so I have 2 more questions, and then, of course, I thank you. The first question would be, if I or John could speak with the President tomorrow and deliver a message on your behalf to tell him, Mr. President, this is what the U.S. has to do in Gaza immediately, what would we tell him?
The U.S. has to tell Qatar, the financiers of Hamas, and the instigators of terrorism all over the world to stop financing Hamas and stop hosting Hamas. The U.S. has to tell the King of Jordan to stop providing intelligence support for Hamas and stop hosting Hamas leaders in Amman in palaces with bodyguards provided by the Jordanian government. He has to draw a line in the sand for those people. Why didn't they make presidents strong anymore? Why America doesn't make presidents like it used to, when FDR was able to draw a line in the sand for Hitler? I mean, those are like small countries with nothing. They depend on the United States. Why the weakness, Mr. President? Also, Mr. President, we Palestinians, and I conveying to you a message, Mr. President, that Palestinians in Gaza told me. They would, believe it or not, love for Israel to come back to Gaza. And I'm publishing this and providing the names of people and what they told me. And you can ask Lisa Daftari, because she's mentioned something like that they would rather see Israel return to Gaza. The only peace we knew inside Israel is when we were under the Jews' control. The only peace we knew was when West Bank and elsewhere, and Gaza in particular, was under Israel's control. This whole thing has turned out to be that our struggle was a mess, and our children and grandchildren were going to be suffering because of it. So it's now time for Mr. President Obama to pick his enemies and friends well in the Middle East. Qatar and the King of Jordan are not your friends, Mr. President. Israel is.
Well, Mudar, we are going to do our best to send this message to as many members of Congress and, of course, to the White House as we can. And I thank you very much. And non-related, but you mentioned the Quran earlier, and I have a copy of the Quran that I've read, and I'm not sure I'm reading the right copy. So I'm going to ask you in English, because I don't read Arabic, but if I were to go purchase a copy of the Quran and read it and study it on my own, which version should I be reading, and what could you tell me to go purchase in a bookstore that would be the proper book that I should be reading?
Well, actually, most of the common translations of the Quran are usually acceptable. I've seen them in English. Some have minor mistakes. In the Quran, you will find basically 75 to 90% copied from the Torah, and you will find that there are verses that speak about no enforcement in religion, treating your parents well, and there are verses describing the Jews that they are the chosen children of God and that they're going to return to the land of Israel. Also, you will find one particular concept in the Quran a little disturbing, which is the concept of global domination. So basically it says that if it wasn't for the fact that God was pushing people to fight one another, there would be no peace on earth. So the concept of war to establish peace. So it's not a good, perfectly dandy book, but it's nothing. I mean, if Muslims just stick to it, they would find, like, we would not need, basically, we would have no justification to 95% of the terrorism we see today. All of the holy books of any religion do have issues, maybe because they were written in the old days when, for example, beheading someone was acceptable. It's like an electric chair today. But usually it's way, if you want to consider the evilness or violence, it doesn't count for 5% or even 1% of what's in the Hadith. The Hadith is basically Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, and the Hadith, we want to end this with. Many times when I was reading the Hadith, I've read Hitler's book twice, and many times when I'm reading the Hadith, I've seen concepts in the Hadith which are exactly Nazi ideology. And I was like, come on, am I sure Hitler never read it? Hitler was evil, but he was not a stupid man. He was a well-read person. And this evil genius, in my opinion, and his connection to Mufti Hosseini and others of Palestine, I think somewhere in his life he's read the Hadith, because he's got exactly supremacist, noble blood concepts of the Hadith. And I've met one KKK member in the United States, and he surprised me that he actually reads the Islamic text and he thinks the values in them do match his ideology.
That's very interesting. Mudar Zahran, thank you so much for joining John and I in the Final Say today. The information and things that you've discussed with us are so important for as many people to hear as possible. And we will promote this as much as possible. We ask you to do the same and take the chance and opportunity, if you will, to provide your website so people could follow you as well.
Well, actually, I would love for people just to look me up at Facebook at the time. You should just go facebook.com, then /Mudar, MUDARZ. Again, that's facebook.com /MUDARZ. And my website is coming up very soon. Looking forward to being your guest again. Thank you very much for fighting for the truth and for the righteous. And God bless America and save the children of Gaza and the civilians in Israel hiding in bunkers because of the Hamas rockets.
Well, and Mudar, thank you. Peace be with you and your family, and we wish you well. We'll talk soon.
Okay, and Laila Tov from Israel. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Excellent analysis there from Mudar.